Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of our political podcast. So, I am here with my dad, and I'm kind of scared to announce the topic. First, let me just say that this is a show where we don't try to state our opinion or try to influence someone's ideas in one way or the other. We are just discussing a topic, and sometimes with that discussion, there's going to be some emotions. And so this is going to be one of those topics, especially here in Texas, that might get some people already ready to defend their side. We understand that. And so whatever we're saying in this topic is just exploring the topic of guns in Texas, gun rights, gun safety, policy choices, etc. So with that being said, if you have an opinion, if you have an argument, if you have a contention, we are open to that. We're not here necessarily advocating for like a hard and fast policy. We are just here discussing some of the issues in DFW and in Texas, and guns is one of those issues. So with that being said, I hope everyone gives us grace, and I hope if you do have a contention, just let us know. All right, Warfield, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, first, so the main reason why we chose this topic for today is because it's been about a year since Texas went permitless on guns. Okay, so what exactly does going permitless on guns mean? I mean, it just means that Texans don't necessarily have to have a license to carry a gun. Even though people can carry guns while unlicensed, there are different rules for those unlicensed carry, in terms of if you're unlicensed and you're near a school or you're near a college, that might be an issue. Like you might be required to be licensed to carry guns near schools, near colleges. Some businesses might require you to carry if you have a gun, to carry a license. And then also private property owners can also be like you're not just free to roam around. Like people can put in policies in place to have you require a license to carry, especially at their business or near schools and stuff like that. So that's one kind of overview of license to carry versus unlicensed to carry and some of the restrictions and non-restrictions. All right, so it's been about a year. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to learn more about the law, you can go to the Texas State Law Library. That's always a great resource for actual laws, and then search it from there. So, because it's a little over a year old, like you were saying, there's not going to be a lot of articles jump into the top of the internet searches for these. So if you want to get the actual law and the information on that, there's the resource for you, the Texas State Law Library.
Right. And so and because we are in an election season, and because we're recording this on October 29th, and election day is November 8th, official election day, I do want to just kind of bring this up. Governor Abbott was the one who signed this permitless carry into law, and the candidate for governor, Beto O'Rourke, says he wants to repeal permitless carry, but he's not necessarily against repealing every single gun law. He is an advocate of responsible gun ownership. So that's just kind of our major candidates' stances on the issue. Okay, so this is an article that I found. Well, okay, yeah. So this is an article that I found on reformaustin.org, which is obviously a more political or liberal website. And they released an article that was titled "Texas Mass Shootings Are Up 62.5% Since Permitless Carry Bill." Now, this article was published on September 8th. And it basically just goes over kind of when the permitless carry law came into effect. From June 13th, 2020 to June 13th, 2021, Texas had 40 mass shootings. And then in that same time period from 2021 to 2022, the number of mass shootings rose to 65. Now, these numbers were compiled from Stanford University's MSA data project, the Mass Shooting Tracker, Fox's Gun Violence Archives, Mother Jones, the Washington Post, the FBI, and the Congressional Research Service. So I do want to note, because this was something that I was kind of like confused about, when you purchase a gun, does that require a background check versus getting a license to carry a gun? Those are two separate things. So when you purchase a gun at a gun show, and this has been like one of the biggest contentions forever from Democrats and people who are more liberal, is that when you purchase a gun at a gun show, there was like a loophole where you won't get a background check, right? Versus if you go to a store, you might go under a background check. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking. Warfield, do you want to pop in with any of your talking points?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and
Okay.
And it's been really difficult because, we try to keep a balanced approach. And I got to be honest, it's very difficult. In fact, I've gone through 4 or 5 iterations this morning of internet searches trying to find articles that are pro carry.
Right. That,
in
that is
Texas.
true. Yeah.
And they're just not out there right now. Now, I think of maybe a year ago, there was probably much more, but they're not coming to the top of the search lists. And like I said, I've rephrased my searches a couple times and clicked on it a couple times. There's quite a few articles, even from liberal publications, that are somewhat neutral. I mean, they're not advocating that they have to, that Texas should repeal the law or anything like that. They just go into a lot of explanations about whatever thing it is and what their concerns are. But to be pro, carry, or in favor of the law, it's a little difficult right now to find articles that kind of give a argument towards why this, that we want. I do worry about. I think one of the biggest concerns I have is people conflate being able to buy a gun and carry a gun where they want with something called your rights, and people will tout the Second Amendment as something that if you do anything against guns, you're taking away people's rights. I think people forget, rights come with responsibilities. Now, whether you can legislate responsibilities, I don't know. And that's where this big argument, or a lot of the argument, comes into place. I can make the joke, if I go to a large entertainment venue where there's lots of restaurants and bars and entertainment and, concerts or whatever, and it says I only can park for 2 hours. Is my right to party been taken away because I can only park for 2 hours? Of course not. But when I get into, can I carry a gun in public? Is that a right? That gets to be a little bit more gray to me. I've shoot guns. I've shot guns in my life since I was a child. We used to go out all sorts of crazy places out in the country and shoot the heck up of beer cans and all sorts of stuff. Carried a gun clearing brush so I won't get bit by a rattlesnake. I've done a lot of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So carrying a gun still involves some responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not own a gun while my children were growing up. I haven't owned one since. But before I had children, there were times in my life where there were multiple guns in my house or where I lived. So you got responsibilities with owning a gun that I think some of these laws and some of the just open carry and this proliferation of this is taking away our rights if you do anything to stomp on being able to own a gun, is the way they kind of phrase it. I think it's a little bit more than that. Now, again, we do want to present both sides, and it's been a little difficult finding something that gives us a pro argument in the basic internet searches right now. So, but my concern is it a right? Yeah, you can own a gun, but is it responsible to walk around with a gun on your hip wherever you go out in public? I mean, it's not 1860s anymore, 1870s in the Wild West. It's a little bit more of a different environment. So that's my
And
thoughts for right this second.
I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. And I also like the incidences of like mental health, like ticking up and up and up and up, especially among like teenagers and young adults, leading to more like suicides, is also something that I want to bring into this conversation in the sense of responsible gun ownership and the right to own a gun and all that stuff. I do want to say, we growing up in Texas, I think I'm a little bit more open to gun ownership than a lot of my California counterparts, like my friends in California and my friends and on the East Coast and stuff like that. And the reason I say that is because I was like against gun ownership before I think when I was like maybe in high school. And then I spent a summer living on a ranch in Texas. And that ranch was in the middle of nowhere. That ranch would get very, very dark at night. And there were neighbors kind of like down the street. There were rattlesnakes on that ranch. There were hogs, like wild hogs, which is a thing in Texas. Wild hogs are a thing in Texas on that,
Feral hogs. Yeah.
feral hogs. And it was me and another girl just living on this ranch. And my mind became a little bit more open because I'm like, oh, like this is why people own guns out here, because if you're being attacked by, like a wild hog in the middle of the night, you're screwed, or if you're just anything out there could be, all over the place. So I became a little bit more open-minded, and I think the person who was living with me beforehand also became like, she's not a big, not at all like a gun advocate or anything like that. But I think even she became more open to the idea of like gun rights in Texas, because it's like there's that situation. But then again, is it a right to own a gun? Like, do you have the right to own a gun and carry it anywhere you want? That I agree is a little bit more it is debatable. It's more open to debate.
And I think your point is made, real well with the talk about, living, because I did visit Victoria, Mom and I did go check up on her, and it was pretty out there. But in general, I mean, like I said, I used to clear brush. We had a friend of mine had a ranch, and we'd go out when I was in college out there and help clear brush. You had to carry a handgun because the reality was there, rattlesnakes were real. And, you would be out there in the brush, and, the concept of having to use it immediately was always on your mind. So that's responsible gun ownership. I mean, you have a purpose for it. You have to know how to use a gun.
Mm-hmm.
One great thing about when permits are required, you have to go through a little bit of training and some other information. It's not just a background check. And so, knowing how to use a gun, again, responsible gun ownership, knowing how to keep it clean, knowing how to lock it up, knowing or having a place to keep it locked up, things of this nature. And these are, responsible gun ownerships type, procedures. But just walking down the street with your gun on your hip, is that a right? As long as you can own the gun, use it when you need to, including self-defense. But to have it just, carried in your car, walking around wherever you want to go. Now, of course, you can't carry it into a bar. You can't carry it into government buildings. There are still some restrictions based on, some public safety concerns that are in law, but just open carry whenever, that's maybe expanding rights beyond what is needed. But again, we're not trying to get opinions, and I don't have a pro argument to kind of make their point for them. But, we do worry to an extent of what is a right versus what is, are you exceeding, are you pushing something to an extreme that may not be needed?
Mm-hmm. So that being said, we're talking about opinions. I do want to talk about like other Texas opinions. This is according to Texas Politics. .uttexas.edu, like that's the website. This is the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin.
Texas.
What did you say?
No, I was just agreeing with you, Texas. I
Okay.
heard the website, so I was like, that's the University of Texas.
Yeah, which my dad is a proud alumnus
Right.
of. Exactly.
So
This is a very recent poll. This is a poll that was published in October of 2022. And the question for this poll was, should gun laws be more or less strict? That was I think the only question for this poll. And so 55% of Texans said more strict, 15% said less strict, and 24% said left as they are now. Now let's go to party identification. Okay, so again, 55% of Texans said gun laws should be more strict. All right, so we have that 55%. 87% of the people who agreed with that statement were Democrats. 27% of people who agreed with that statement were Republicans, and 38% of people who agreed with that statement are independent, which Texas has a lot of independent voters, which I was surprised. And then left as they are now. So that was 24% of Texans said they want it left as they are now. And the party ID identifications were 46% Republican, 29% independent, and 3% Democrat. And then less strict, 22% Republican, 18% independent, and 7% Democrat, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, so it seems like even Republicans are kind of like pushing towards this idea of more responsible gun ownership. I want to phrase it that way, but I don't know if that is the correct term of phrasing it. But basically, they're just saying like gun laws should be more strict. Is like the overwhelming opinion, 55% compared to 15%, which is less strict.
And you have to be real careful because that's a general statement. Gun laws more strict, less strict. You know, how do you define that? Does that mean background checks? Does that mean we're limiting who can carry a gun? Or does that mean, we repeal open carry? So that whole question leaves a lot of ambiguity into the question. Now, I think with the recent passing of the constitutional carry bill last year, they're probably talking mostly about that because that's what's been in the news for the last year. And I do want to mention this because this is real important. Before this law went into effect, law enforcement officers lobbied against it. And that's interesting because most law enforcement individuals on an individual basis are usually pro, Second Amendment. We'll call it that. You know, they do believe that in a general sense that people have a right to own a gun. But for the organizations, the law enforcement organizations, to come out and lobby against open carry was pretty interesting. Of course, their fears are the obvious. 2 or 3 people in public have guns on them, and then they get into an argument, and then bullets are flying everywhere. It's harder when they make a traffic stop to know if someone has a gun somewhere in the car. It's harder to, do a search, domestic violence, where the things where they go in where the most dangers are domestic violence disputes. These are real important for them to know, they have some degree of control. Otherwise, they don't need some individual flying off the handle and pulling out a gun and shooting everybody, including the police officer trying to help people by breaking up a domestic violence dispute. So they came out against the open carry or the constitutional carry bill.
Mm-hmm. And I think, it makes sense because they are also like trying to protect themselves as much as they are public safety. And that's also something that, besides like law enforcement getting involved, or not getting involved, but also probably more likely to come across like individuals with more violent intentions if they do have a gun. Another thing is like domestic violence is like one of the biggest issues. And a lot of advocates who are wanting more like strict gun laws are citing like domestic violence as one of their like number one issues. And this is also another thing, like I went to this is just like an anecdote, but I went to a Texas, no, not Texas, an empowerment conference, um, like outside in an area outside of Dallas, like a woman's empowerment conference in an area outside of Dallas. And a lot of women would give their testimony about like their life, right? Because there was like some religious aspects in this woman empowerment conference because it's Texas. And what else do you expect? And a lot of women that would give their testimony would cite like domestic violence, you know, like it was like one of the main speakers talked about how like, would talk about how she escaped from her husband during like a domestic violence situation. Another woman talked about her father being, you know, like abusive, and like woman talking about like leaving abusive relationships. And I'm like, oh my god, like luckily I've never been in an abusive relationship, but, and I say that laughingly because I'm 25 and I've never been in a romantic relationship. That's why I'm laughing. But at the same time, it's like and we know people in our family who've been in abusive relationships, and it's just like romantic relationships. So that domestic violence issue, especially in Texas, is one of the things that like I don't think really gets brought up in either, and not it gets brought up in the like stricter gun law portion, but it doesn't get brought up at all in the more kind of like Republican conservative right side of the argument, which I think is probably doing the their argument a hindrance because they don't really address it. Unless I could see them addressing it, saying like, well, women can carry a gun, but I don't know if that solves the issue of domestic violence.
No, it inflames it even more.
Yeah.
I mean, domestic violence is one thing. I was just more concerned about the police, you know, officers having to respond to certain types of what they call calls when they go out and deal with something like domestic violence. Their concerns, even though all your points about domestic violence are probably another topic and something worth looking into,
but
because it is a serious problem.
I do want
in this
to
country
I
separately.
do want to like add a statistic really quick. In 2020, 228 Texans were killed by intimate partners. 67% of those were killed with a firearm. So that's just kind of like, there is this kind of like, that's where the concern is. Like there are statistics to back this up. All right, go ahead, Dad.
Well, and I was going to say though, but whether or not, you know, open carry affects people having a gun at home where they could use it in these situations, probably a little bit different. But for the police purposes, it's beneficial if they had, you know, at least some idea what's happening when they go into a situation, you know, where they're not worried every single moment whether or not someone has a gun or not. And then there's the, the ability for them to, you know, if you have a permit, you have a little bit more requiring people to have a permit. You have a little bit more understanding of responsibilities around owning a gun. It gets to the point where when guns are everywhere and everybody has one, you know, we've made this joke before, your right's in when your fist hits my face. But we don't want to get to that point with guns because, you know, you shoot somebody, you know, your rights are going to be taken away because you're going to prison. And people forget this. And we have heated moments. We have road rage incidents. We have all sorts of things going on where we really don't need just a proliferation of guns everywhere. But again, though, you know, owning a gun is not the problem. It's your understanding of what your responsibilities are as a gun owner. And you make it easier and easier and easier without some at least ability to make sure people understand their responsibilities. But, you know, because you have to get a driver's license. You just can't run out and drive a car, you know, and, you know, there's commercial licenses for, you know, driving trucks. You know, there's some responsibilities and some requirements in doing these things. It doesn't take away your right to drive, but it does put some concept of what it entails to be a responsible driver by going through driver's ed and getting licenses and taking tests and things like this. So, you know, have we gone too far with gun rights? You know, we'll leave it as a question for you,
Mhm.
the listener, to decide in regards to what is the rights and what are the responsibilities here.
And with that being said, we are going to wrap up this episode. I think a great time to kind of like revisit this issue would be after the elections, just so we can kind of see. I mean, I've already predicted that Governor Abbott is going to win just because Texas is, first of all, there's a red wave right now across the United States, probably because of issues with, well, actually, I'm not going to put anything else. If you just like look at, a lot of the polling and a lot of the experts, they do say that there is a red wave across the United States overall right now. So with that being said, I also see Governor Abbott winning. And then also, I think we should look at this issue after the election, especially
Something
if,
ongoing.
especially if O'Rourke ends up winning the election. All right. Any last words, Warfield?
No, I think we tried to be, again, responsible to the points. I just wish I had found something so we could, give the pro and con to all this. And there's a lot of pros to limiting gun ownership, much less, cons to it. But then pros arguments were hard to find, and I'm a little disappointed in that. Other than that,
Happy
we'll
Halloween.
also get into domestic violence sometime. I think
That's
that's a good
true.
topic.
Yeah, I agree with that. And with that being said, I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful week. And this weather is getting colder. Actually, no, it's going to get warmer in the week before it gets. Yeah.
Early voting started in Texas. Don't forget that.
That is true. Early voting did start. So get out there and vote. And we will talk to you later.